Hello, and today we're going to talk about Dulux Lexicon. So it's one of the most well-known colours in the Dulux range, and it's a beautiful white to use for both interiors and exteriors. And I wanted to talk to you about it being very cool white. So this is something you really need to bear in mind if you're thinking of using it. It's a lovely crisp white because it has a blue undertone, and so this makes it a very elegant white to use. It doesn't have any yellow in it at all, and I know people do say to me quite often, I want a white without any yellow. Well, the reason they're saying that is because the yellow tones tend to be a bit dated, but whites now with a slight yellow undertone are beautiful, and you don't actually see that undertone when you take it away from everything else. But when you're dealing with undertones, you need to make sure that you're working with similar undertones so that you don't put a very cool white on your walls if you've got a warmer white on your kitchen cabinets. So you need to consider undertones very carefully in that way. You also need to consider the flooring that you have and other elements in your home. So sofas and rugs and everything like that. So don't just think that, oh, I'm going to choose Lexicon because it doesn't have any of that yellow in it that I just don't like. And so that's going to be perfect for me, because all it's going to do is actually highlight perhaps yellow tones that are in your kitchen cabinet that you hadn't maybe even noticed before. So that's a really important element. Now, I just wanted to show you, first of all, um, this is Dulux Lexicon Quarter, and this is Snowy Mountains. So you can really start to see that you can see the undertone here more in Snowy Mountains. And if I take that away, then you've got that, just very crisp white. But if I take the lexicon away, you've still just got a plain, really beautiful white that you can use in your house. So it's making sure that you get those undertones right when you're planning to use something crisp like lexicon. And because it's got the blue undertone, it also creates a certain mood in your house. So you always need to think about this too when you're thinking about the type of feeling that you want for your home. So if you live in a really hot climate and you want something that's just very cool and crisp, then as long as it works with the other undertones that are currently in your house, you can absolutely use it and it will be perfect. It will really give you that very elegant, very cool, crisp look. If perhaps you're living in a house in a colder climate, you might feel that it's going to give you the wrong kind of mood because because it's so cool. It perhaps isn't going to give you that welcoming feel in a cooler climate. So you really have to think about where you are and other whites or colours that you put with a blue based white. And you can absolutely use it in a colder climate, but think about other textures that you can bring into the scheme. So you're really going to need to think carefully about artworks on the walls, making sure that you're bringing in other elements to make the house feel loved and welcoming and warm, because otherwise it can really be a little bit cool and grey. It also isn't great necessarily for south facing rooms because again they don't get very much natural light. They don't very rarely a true south-facing room, perhaps in a shaded part of the garden, doesn't really get any natural sunlight. And so using something like a blue-based white like Lexicon in there on the walls could be really quite challenging. Now, where I think Dulux Lexicon Quarter comes into its own is as a trim colour, because it's really beautiful and fresh, and you can see it here with the full strength lexicon. Um, it's just a lovely crisp trim colour, and it works really well. It actually works really well with a lot of other neutrals as well. So even if you've got perhaps a warmer neutral on your wall, or you have something like Dulux Natural White on your walls, you can still use the Lexicon Quarter trim with it, as long as you use it everywhere and don't combine it with another bright white that has a different undertone. Because when Lexicon Quarter is just used as a trim, you don't really see the undertone of the blue. You just see a beautiful crisp white trim. So this can be a really useful thing to remember. For exteriors too, Lexicon Quarter is a fabulous colour for getting a crisp white trim. A lot of people look at using Dulux Vivid White, which is beautiful, and it's softer. It's certainly, when you put it next to Dulux Lexicon Quarter, it's certainly much softer, but it doesn't really have any pigment in it. So painters don't like it because they quite often need to use an additional coat to get the coverage, whereas Dulux Lexicon Quarter does have that little bit more pigment in it, and it gets great coverage inside and outside. So I'm a big fan of Lexicon Quarter as a trim colour, but as I say, just be very careful with using it, particularly inside, because you've got to make sure that it's not going to really show up other undertones in perhaps joinery that you have in your living room, and maybe if you have a beautiful big bookcase that's in a particular white, you might think that you know you love that bookcase, it's a beautiful white. When you then put the Dulux Lexicon Quarter next to it, you might think, whoa, I didn't realise that had actually that much grey in it or that much yellow in it. You've never noticed that before. And that's the thing with finding undertones in whites, you need to put them next to each other. So I do recommend it as a trim colour, but just make sure that it doesn't show up the undertone in something else, because that can really spoil the overall look. If you do want a crisp colour throughout your house, you can then use either all Lexicon Quarter, or if you want a little bit of contrast, you can use Lexicon Half, and that just gives you a subtle change in colour and can work really well to just give you a little bit more depth on your walls. I actually really unless you've got a very contemporary house, I don't tend to use the full strength Lexicon throughout, because again, it's a very cool colour, but it can work in certain environments if you really do want that very cool, crisp, contemporary look. Where I do like to use Lexicon in its full strength is outside, if you want a very crisp exterior. Now, I certainly wouldn't use the quarter strength everywhere, because it would just be, whoa, way too bright. As I say, it's perfect for a white trim outside, but it is quite bright. It's quite interesting to show you Lexicon full strength with Dover White, and you can see here, this is Colorbond Dover White, and it's quite a bit darker than full strength Lexicon. So you can really see the blue undertone in Dover White here, because you can see how well it goes with the Lexicon. Whereas going back to our Snowy Mountains, which is a beautiful neutral white, look at the difference there, and you can see how crisp and cool Dover White is. And I have talked about this in other videos that I've made, that you do need to be careful with Colorbond Dover White outside if you're putting it with other whites, and you can see here how that could really be quite an issue outside if you're using a warmer white. So if you do plan to use Dulux Lexicon on everything outside, just be aware of how bright it is. So you might want to perhaps knock it back and use the Dover White, the Colorbond Dover White as a paint colour, just to give you a little bit more depth and coverage. And of course then if you're using Dover White on your garage door or your fascia, etc., that's going to work really well. Now, don't get too hung up with splitting hairs with some of these whites outside. There's the half, the Dover White and the Lexicon, because don't forget that we're looking at it on a screen, which will also be a little bit different, but we're also looking at the colours inside. So even though I've got some good lighting in here, we're looking at these inside. When you take these outside, they'll probably all look completely the same, unless you're in a very shaded south-facing area with a veranda, etc. They're all going to look pretty much the same. So if you're using Colorbond Dover White as your fascia, because you have to have a Colorbond fascia, you can still use the fresher Lexicon if you wanted on your walls, because when they're outside, they, in the sunlight, they're going to look pretty much the same. The only reason I would maybe use Colorbond Dover White everywhere is if I just felt the house needed that little bit more depth. But we are talking about really quite brilliant whites outside here, and as I've said in other posts, I don't tend to use the quarter strength of whites for everything, because it really simply is just too white outside. So I know people will look at this and say, oh, but I want a really white house, I don't want to see any undertone. You won't see that when you're outside, but you would see it if you start putting other undertones with it. So that's where you have to be a bit more careful. So I hope that's given you a bit of an overview on using Dulux Lexicon. It's a great range. Always check your undertones, and always think about the mood that you want to create. It's most important when you're putting together any scheme, even if it's just a white scheme. It's just as important that you consider that mood and that feeling and where your house is situated. So I hope that's been helpful, and do sign up to my YouTube channel. I have lots more coming, lots of ideas for things that can help you to choose the right colours, finishes and styles for your home. Thanks for joining me.